When my phone buzzed with a message from my father, I hesitated. It was a group text, the kind he reserved for family events. I was usually left out of. My older brother Mark had already replied with a series of thumbs-up emojis. I skimmed the message: family dinner at Stonehill Steakhouse, Dad's retirement celebration, Saturday 7 p.m. Be there. I tossed my phone onto the counter, staring at it like it had just insulted me. The same family that had treated me like an outsider for years now wanted me to join them for a fancy dinner. I felt the old anger stir, the kind I'd buried long ago when I stopped expecting anything from them. Let me give you some background. I'm 37, the younger brother in a family that values degrees and job titles over grit and independence. Mark, 3 years my senior, took the corporate path: straight A's, Ivy League, and a corner office in finance. Meanwhile, I dropped out of college after a semester, got my commercial driver's license, and built a logistics company from the ground up. Started with a second-hand truck, a 12-year-old Freightliner that felt like it was held together by hope and duct tape. Now, I own a fleet of 15 rigs, a warehouse, and a team of 25, including drivers and office staff. I'm pulling in high six figures after expenses, but my family still acts like I'm some dropout who got lucky. Mark, the golden child, has always been the apple of my parents' eyes. He married his college sweetheart Lisa, and they live in a 4,000-square-foot McMansion in the suburbs, complete with a white picket fence, 2 kids, and a pair of purebred labs. I'm pretty sure they have a sign in their foyer that says "Live, Laugh, Love." Mom never misses a chance to remind me of how proud she is of Mark. "Your brother just got promoted again," she'd say, cutting into her organic avocado toast. "Have you thought about going back to school?" she'd add, as if my business and the life I've built weren't real accomplishments. My father is no better. He spent 35 years in middle management at a manufacturing firm, always griping about how he was one promotion away from the corner office if not for office politics. In their eyes, I'm the rough-edged son who never quite fit into their polished world. I thought about skipping the dinner. It's not like they'd notice if I didn't show. Hell, they might even prefer it, but something about this invitation felt different. Maybe it was the way they phrased it, like a command instead of a request. Or maybe it was just my stubborn streak, the same one that kept me on the road for years, sleeping in truck stops and hauling freight when everyone else said I'd never make it. I decided to go more out of curiosity than anything else. I wanted to see what they were playing at. It was a small act of defiance, a quiet rebellion against the role they'd assigned me. If they were expecting the black sheep to quietly take his place at the kids' table, they were in for a surprise. The night of the dinner, I pulled into the steakhouse parking lot in my F3 M50, a beast of a truck with a custom suspension and enough horsepower to pull a house off its foundation. I'd just had it detailed, the black paint gleaming under the streetlights. My German Shepherd. Max sat in the passenger seat, his head on a swivel, watching the valet approach with a mix of curiosity and suspicion. I scratched behind his ears. "Stay, buddy. I'll be back soon." Walking into the restaurant, I felt the eyes on me. I was wearing my usual attire: work boots, jeans, a plain black t-shirt, while the other patrons were in suits and cocktail dresses. I spotted my family at a long table in the center of the room. My parents. Mark, his wife, Lisa, and their 2 kids, all dressed like they were posing for a catalog. I felt the old familiar prickle of resentment, but pushed it down. "Hey, look who decided to show up," Mark said, grinning like he'd just won something. My father barely glanced up from his menu. My mother gave me that tight-lipped smile that said she was trying to be supportive but didn't quite manage it. I pulled out a chair and sat down. Before I could even pick up the menu, my dad cleared his throat. "We ordered the first round of drinks already. You're fine with just water, right?" "Of course." Wouldn't want to waste the good wine on the son who works with his hands. I bit back a sarcastic reply and just nodded. This was going to be a long night. Dinner started exactly as I expected. Small talk about Mark's latest project, my parents' retirement plans, and Lisa's garden renovation. It was the kind of conversation that made me want to drink straight from the bottle. But I played my part, nodding and offering the occasional. "That's nice when appropriate." My mother turned to me, her eyes bright with forced interest. "So how's what do you call it?" "The trucking business," she said it like trucking was a 4-letter word, something rough and unrefined, not a multi-million-dollar operation with dozens of employees. "It's good," I replied, keeping my tone neutral. "Just added 3 more trucks to the fleet. Landed a big contract with a national distributor. Things are solid." Mark's head snapped up, his eyes narrowing slightly. He'd always been competitive, though he'd never admit it. In his world, degrees and titles were the only real measures of success. The idea that his dropout brother was thriving in a field he considered beneath him clearly rubbed him the wrong way. "Oh, that's good for you," my mother said, clearly at a loss for how to respond. She quickly pivoted back to safer ground. "Mark just got promoted, you know. Regional director now." Mark leaned back in his chair, flashing that self-satisfied grin. "Yeah, it's been a long time coming. Lot of late nights, but it's finally paying off." "Congratulations," I said, genuinely, meaning it. Despite everything, I'd never had a problem with hard work. In fact, I respected it. But what I couldn't stand was the way my family treated my own achievements like footnotes in their narrative. As the appetizers arrived, I noticed something odd. The server had only brought 6 plates for a table of 7. I glanced at the empty spot next to me. That's when it hit me. They hadn't even included me in the reservation. I was an afterthought, a last-minute addition to their carefully curated family tableau. I took a deep breath, forcing down the familiar bitterness. I wasn't here for their approval. I was here because I wanted to see what they were up to. When the entrees arrived, my father raised his glass. "To family," he said, his eyes flicking briefly in my direction before settling back on Mark. "To those who've made us proud." Lisa beamed, clinking her glass against Mark's while my mother dabbed at her eyes, clearly moved by the moment I just reached for my water. The conversation drifted into familiar territory. The grandkids. Mark's recent golf trip. My mother's latest attempt at painting. I was halfway through my steak when my father cleared his throat again, signaling a shift in the tone of the evening. So he began, his voice taking on that practiced managerial tone he used when he wanted something. "I've been thinking about the future. Now that I'm retired, I need to make sure everything is in order financially speaking." I knew where this was going. I'd been expecting it the moment I saw the dinner invitation. "Mark and I have been discussing some opportunities." My father continued. "Ways to ensure the family's legacy. Keep everything secure." Mark nodded, leaning in with the enthusiasm of a man about to close a deal. "We've been looking at some real estate investments," he said. "High potential returns, but it requires significant upfront capital." I set my fork down, locking eyes with my father. "And you're hoping I'll contribute?" My mother shifted uncomfortably, her eyes darting between us. Mark took a sip of his wine, clearly enjoying the show. "Well, it makes sense," my father said, leaning back in his chair. "You're doing well. Better than we expected, frankly. And this would benefit everyone. Family supporting family." There it was, the real reason for the invitation. They weren't reaching out to me because they'd suddenly developed a sense of familial warmth. They wanted my money. Interesting? I said, leaning back as well. "But if you needed an investor, why not just go through a bank? Seems more straightforward." Mark's smile faltered for a fraction of a second before he recovered. "Banks are complicated," he said quickly. "And expensive. This is about keeping it in the family." I couldn't help but smile at the irony. They'd spent years treating me like an outsider, and now they wanted to pull me into their scheme under the banner of family loyalty. Before I could respond, my mother jumped in, her voice tinged with a desperation I hadn't heard before. "It's just, we want to make sure everyone is taken care of. That includes you, of course." I almost laughed. They hadn't included me in a family decision in over a decade, but now suddenly I was part of the inner circle. I took a slow sip of water, letting the silence stretch. They were watching me, waiting for me to bite. Mark's smile had taken on a slightly forced quality, and my father's hand was gripping his glass a little too tightly. "Well," I said, finally setting my glass down with a soft clink, "I appreciate you thinking of me. But if you're looking for investors, I suggest you draft a proper business plan. I don't make financial decisions over steak and wine." My father's face darkened and Mark's jaw tightened, but I didn't care. For the first time in years, I felt a sense of control, like I'd finally broken free of the role they'd written for me. As the waiter came by to clear the plates, my father forced a smile, clearly struggling to keep his composure. "Of course," he said, his voice a little too loud. "We'll talk more about it later." I just nodded, my mind already turning over the possibilities. If they thought I'd be an easy mark, they had no idea who they were dealing with. I excused myself to the restroom, catching a glimpse of my reflection in the hallway mirror. I looked the same, rugged, a bit rough around the edges, but something had shifted. For the first time in a long while, I felt like I was on the right side of this equation. As I headed back to the table, I couldn't help but smile. If my family wanted to play games, I was more than ready. They'd underestimated me for too long. It was about time they learned the hard way. As I returned to the table, I noticed the subtle shift in their demeanor. My father's smile had tightened into a thin line, and Mark's easy confidence had taken on an edge of calculation. I'd seen that look before, the same one he used to give me when we played backyard football as kids right before he'd try to fake a pass and blindside me. I took my seat, glancing around the table as the conversation resumed. They were laying the groundwork for something, and I had a feeling it wasn't just a simple pitch for a family investment. The server returned with a fresh round of drinks, setting a glass of whiskey in front of my father. He took a long sip, visibly relaxing as the alcohol worked its way through his system. "You know," he said, setting the glass down with a soft clink, "I remember when you first started that little trucking business of yours. We thought you were crazy." I forced a smile, letting the dig slide. "Yeah, I remember. You said I was throwing my future away." My mother flinched slightly, but my father just chuckled. "Well, I'm glad you proved us wrong. Really, it's impressive what you've built." I could hear the unspoken for a dropout hanging in the air, but I wasn't going to give him the satisfaction of reacting. Mark leaned in, his tone suddenly conspiratorial. "Actually, that's something we wanted to talk to you about. Dad and I have been discussing ways to, diversify our investments." I leaned back, crossing my arms over my chest. "Go on." Mark glanced at our father, who gave him a small nod. "We're thinking about starting a logistics branch, something that could complement your operation. Maybe even partner up, share resources, cut down on costs." I had to give them credit. They'd clearly put some thought into this. But I could see the cracks in their plan already. They had no idea what it took to run a logistics company. The long hours, the razor-thin margins, the constant juggling of contracts and schedules. They thought they could waltz in, throw some money around, and instantly match the success I'd spent years building from the ground up. "What exactly are you proposing?" I asked, keeping my tone neutral. My father leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. "We'd bring in the capital. You'd provide the operational expertise. We split the profits 3 ways. 3 ways. I felt a flicker of anger but forced it down. They wanted to cut me in for 1/3 of my own business. "I see," I said, slowly leaning back as if considering the idea. "And what exactly would you two be bringing to the table besides money?" Mark's smile tightened, his fingers flexing around the stem of his wineglass. "Connections, influence. The kind of networking that can take your operation to the next level." I almost laughed out loud. They really thought they were the missing piece in my business's success story. The arrogance was staggering. "Interesting," I said, letting the word hang in the air. "And what would my role be in all this?" My father took another sip of his whiskey, clearly enjoying the moment. "You'd still run the day-to-day. Of course, we're just talking about expanding your reach, bringing in bigger contracts, scaling up. You've done well. But there's a ceiling to what a small business can achieve on its own." I glanced around the table, noting the way my mother was staring intently at her wineglass, as if hoping it would somehow transport her away from this conversation. Even Lisa had gone quiet, her eyes fixed on the linen napkin she was slowly twisting in her lap. "And how much capital are we talking about here?" I asked, leaning in just enough to make them think I was actually considering their offer. Mark exchanged a quick look with my father. "Well, that's something we'd have to discuss further, but we were thinking in the ballpark of a few $100,000. Maybe more, depending on the opportunities." I nodded slowly, letting the silence stretch just long enough to make them uncomfortable. I could see the beads of sweat forming on Mark's brow, the way my father's hand had started to twitch slightly against the tablecloth. "Well," I said, finally breaking the silence, "I appreciate the offer, really, but I'm not sure this is the right fit for me." Mark's jaw tightened, his carefully maintained facade slipping for just a moment. "Come on, don't be like that. This is a chance to really take your business to the next level." I shrugged, reaching for my water glass. "Maybe. But I'm doing just fine on my own. In fact, I'm expanding into warehousing and last-mile delivery. Contracts are lined up for the next 2 years. I've got a solid team, a loyal customer base, and a brand that stands for reliability. I don't need a corporate partnership to tell me how to run my business." My father's face had gone pale, his hand tightening around his glass. Mark looked like he'd just bitten into a lemon. "Well," my father said, his voice a little too loud, "we're just trying to help family supporting family, right?" I met his gaze, letting a small smile curve my lips. "Funny. That's exactly what I'm doing." As the server returned to clear our plates, I caught the flash of frustration in my father's eyes, the barely concealed anger in Mark's clenched jaw. They'd thought they had me cornered, that I'd be so desperate for their approval that I'd jump at the chance to be part of their little scheme. But they'd underestimated me. They always had. I leaned back in my chair, feeling the familiar weight of my wallet against my hip, a quiet reminder of just how far I'd come without them. As the waiter asked if we wanted to see the dessert menu, I glanced at my family, catching the flicker of unease in their eyes. I smiled, leaning in as if to share a secret. "You know," I said, my voice low and steady, "I've learned a lot over the years. One of the most important lessons: never mix family and business." And with that, I leaned back, taking a slow sip of my water, enjoying the silence that settled over the table like a cold, suffocating fog. The server brought the dessert menus, but no one reached for them. The air around the table had grown thick, the faint clinking of silverware and murmurs from nearby tables seeming to press in on us. I watched as my father glanced at my mother, his jaw tight, the whiskey clearly failing to soothe his nerves. Mark's face had taken on a slight flush, a mix of embarrassment and anger simmering just below the surface. So my mother said, her voice a little too bright, trying to cut through the tension, "Have you given any thought to your future, long-term plans?" I nearly laughed. They hadn't cared about my plans for years, not until I started pulling in serious money, but I kept my tone polite. "Yeah, actually, I'm working on acquiring a few more distribution hubs. Looking into a partnership with a major e-commerce platform for last-mile delivery. It's a big step, but I'm confident it'll pay off." Mark shot my father a quick look, his lips pressing into a thin line. Clearly, this wasn't the answer they'd been hoping for. I could almost see the gears turning in their heads, recalculating their approach. "Sounds ambitious," my father said, forcing a smile. "But have you considered the risks? Scaling too quickly can be a dangerous game." I nodded, folding my hands in front of me. "Of course, that's why I'm taking my time, making sure the numbers work before I commit. I'm not looking to gamble with my future." He leaned back, visibly annoyed that I wasn't taking the bait. "Well, just be careful. I've seen a lot of businesses fail because they tried to grow too fast." I met his gaze, letting a small smile creep onto my face. "Appreciate the advice, but I'm doing just fine." The silence stretched, awkward and heavy. My mother shot Mark a pleading look, silently urging him to salvage the conversation. He cleared his throat, leaning in like he was about to deliver a heartfelt speech. "Look," he said, his tone softening in a way that felt as forced as a politician's handshake. "We're just trying to make sure everyone is taken care of. You've done well for yourself, better than we expected, honestly, but wouldn't it be nice to, bring the family back together? Make sure we're all secure?" I tilted my head, pretending to consider his words. "That's an interesting perspective. But if you're talking about security, I'm already there. My business is thriving, my finances are in order, and I've got assets that are appreciating by the day. Honestly, I'm in a pretty good place." The color drained from Mark's face, his fingers tightening around his wine glass. My father's jaw twitched, the muscle in his temple pulsing like a ticking bomb. "Well," my father said, his voice dropping to a more serious tone, "it's not just about you, this is about the family, about making sure we all have a solid foundation." I leaned in, dropping my voice to match his. "You mean a safety net for when things go sideways?" My father's eyes narrowed, his jaw clenching hard enough that I half expected to hear his molars crack. Mark shot him a warning look, silently urging him to dial it back. "Come on," Mark said, forcing a tight smile. "We're family. We should be looking out for each other." I met his gaze, letting the silence stretch just long enough to make him squirm. Funny, I seem to remember a lot of family events I wasn't invited to. Dinners, vacations, holiday parties. But now that I'm doing well, suddenly it's all about family. Mark flinched, his eyes darting to our parents for backup, but they were both too stunned to speak. I watched my father's face darken, his hand tightening around his glass. He was used to being the one in control, the patriarch, the final word. But tonight he was just another desperate man trying to claw back some sense of control. My mother reached across the table, her hand trembling slightly as she placed it on my forearm. "Please," she whispered, her eyes glistening with a hint of tears. "We just want to make things right." I stared at her hand, feeling the faint tremor in her fingers, the warmth of her palm against my forearm. I could almost believe her, almost let myself buy into the idea that they genuinely cared. But then I remembered all the years of backhanded compliments, the whispered criticisms, the endless comparisons to Mark. I slowly pulled my arm away, folding my hands in my lap. "I appreciate the concern, but I've made my peace with where I stand in this family. I'm not looking for handouts, and I'm certainly not looking to bankroll someone else's mistakes." Mark's face had gone pale, his jaw hanging slightly open as if he'd just been slapped. My father's eyes blazed with barely contained fury, his knuckles white around his glass. I leaned back, my pulse steady, my mind clear. I'd spent years letting them define me, letting their opinions shape my self-worth. But not anymore. I glanced around the table, taking in their shocked, angry faces, the way their carefully constructed facade had crumbled. In an instant, I felt a strange sense of satisfaction, a quiet, simmering triumph that I hadn't expected. "Thanks for dinner," I said, rising from my chair and tossing my napkin onto the table. "It's been enlightening." Without another word, I turned and walked away, my boots echoing against the polished marble floors as I made my way to the exit. I pushed open the heavy oak doors, stepping out into the cool night air, my chest rising and falling in slow, even breaths. As I reached my truck, I paused, glancing back at the warm, golden light spilling from the restaurant windows. I could see their silhouettes through the glass, still frozen in place, still reeling from the sudden, brutal reality check I'd just delivered. I climbed into the driver's seat, my hands gripping the leather steering wheel as I started the engine. The deep, rumbling growl of the diesel engine filled the cab, a satisfying, visceral reminder of the life I'd built, a life they'd never truly understood. I pulled out of the parking lot, my headlights cutting through the darkness as I left the restaurant, and my family, behind. A few days after the dinner, I got a call from my sister-in-law, Lisa. She never reached out unless it was for birthdays or holidays, the kind of obligatory family connections that came with forced smiles and awkward small talk. So when her name lit up my phone, I hesitated for a moment before answering. "Hey, Lisa," I said, leaning back in my office chair. "Everything okay?" There was a long pause on the other end, the kind that usually meant bad news. "Hey," she replied, her voice strained. "Look, I know this is a bit awkward, but I wanted to talk to you about the other night." I leaned forward, resting my elbows on my desk. "Oh, what about it?" Another pause followed by a deep breath. "Mark and your parents are, well, they're really upset. They feel like you overreacted, that you kind of embarrassed them." I couldn't help the small, bitter laugh that escaped me. Embarrassed them. That's rich. They tried to rope me into some half-baked investment scheme, then acted like I was the one out of line when I pushed back. I know. She said quickly, her tone edging toward desperation. "But you have to understand, things aren't as stable as they seem. Mark's been under a lot of pressure at work, and your parents, they're not in great shape financially." I closed my eyes, pinching the bridge of my nose. Of course, this wasn't just about pride. It was about money. It always came back to money. "Let me guess," I said, my voice dropping to a cold, steady tone. "They were hoping I'd bail them out." Lisa hesitated, the silence stretching between us like a taut wire. "It's more complicated than that," she finally whispered. "Your dad, he made some bad investments. Their retirement isn't what they thought it would be. They're struggling." I felt a flicker of something. Not quite sympathy, but a distant echo of it. But I quickly shoved it down. This was the same family that had treated me like a second-class citizen for years. The same people who had dismissed my success as a fluke, a lucky break, a phase. So what I said, my voice hardening, they thought I'd just open my checkbook and make it all better, that I'd swoop in like some kind of financial savior because they're suddenly out of options. Lisa's voice grew smaller, more strained. "Their family. You know, they don't know how to ask for help." I leaned back, staring at the ceiling as I felt the familiar knot of anger tighten in my chest. "You mean they don't know how to swallow their pride and admit they've been wrong? That they've treated me like an outsider for years, but now that they need something, they're willing to pretend like we're one big happy family?" Silence, then a quiet, defeated sigh. "Yeah, I guess that's part of it." I let the silence stretch, my mind churning through the years of slights and dismissals, the constant reminders that I'd never quite measured up in their eyes. And now here they were, scrambling for a lifeline, their carefully constructed world crumbling around them. "Look," I said, finally, my tone sharp enough to cut glass. "I'm not going to be their safety net. I've worked too damn hard to get where I am, and I'm not about to throw it all away because they can't manage their finances." But she started, her voice trembling slightly. "They're your parents." I felt my jaw clench, the old familiar anger rising in my chest like a slow-burning fire. That might mean something if they'd ever treated me like a son. I could hear the shaky exhale on the other end, the quiet choking sound of someone trying not to cry. I thought you'd want to know," she whispered. I closed my eyes, letting the silence settle around me like a thick, suffocating blanket. "I appreciate the heads up," I said finally, my voice flat, emotionless. But they made their bed. Now they can lie in it. I hung up without waiting for her response, tossing my phone onto the desk with a dull thud. I leaned back in my chair, staring up at the ceiling as the familiar weight of disappointment settled over me. I'd always known my family would come knocking when the money ran out, that they'd try to guilt me into bailing them out when their world started to crumble. But somehow the reality of it still stung, the bitter taste of betrayal lingering on my tongue. As I sat there, the minutes ticking by in the heavy, oppressive silence of my office, I felt something shift inside me. A quiet, simmering resolve, a hard, unbreakable line forming in the pit of my stomach. They'd made their choice, drawn their lines in the sand, and I'd respected that for years, kept my distance, built my life on my own terms. But if they thought I'd let them drag me back into their mess, they were about to learn just how wrong they'd been. I reached for my laptop, flipping it open and pulling up my financial records. If they wanted to play games, I'd make damn sure I had every piece of leverage I needed. I'd spent my whole life being the underestimated one, the forgotten son, the black sheep. But that was about to change. The next week passed in a blur. I threw myself into work, signing new contracts, securing better freight rates, and negotiating warehouse leases. I wasn't just building my business anymore, I was fortifying it, making it untouchable. I knew my family well enough to see where this was headed. If they couldn't charm or guilt me into helping them, they'd find some other way to wedge themselves into my life. I wasn't going to let that happen. Then, just as I expected, my father called. I let it ring. Watching his name flash across my phone screen, the same last name we shared but little else. When it went to voicemail, I leaned back in my chair, fingers steepled, and waited. A few moments later, the phone buzzed again. A text this time. "Dad, son, we need to talk. It's important." I let it sit for a few minutes before picking up my phone, typing a quick reply. "Me busy, what's this about?" He responded almost immediately, the message coming through in a staccato burst of frustration. "Dad, I'd prefer to do this in person. Family business." Family. Business, I felt a flicker of anger. A sharp, bitter twist in my gut. They'd ignored me, belittled me, and pushed me to the fringes for years. Now suddenly I was family again just because they needed a bailout. "Me find my office tomorrow at 10. He didn't reply, but I knew he'd show up. They always did when they needed something. The next morning, I made sure to get in early. Brewing a fresh pot of coffee and settling into my chair. My desk spotless, the sunlight streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my office, I wanted to make a point to show him just how far I'd come without his help. At exactly 10:00 a.m., I heard the heavy, deliberate footsteps in the hallway. My office door swung open, and my father stepped inside, his shoulders hunched, jaw set. The faint lines of worry etched into his weathered face. He paused in the doorway, his eyes sweeping over the polished floors, the framed certificates on the wall, the carefully organized shelves. I could see the surprise flicker across his face, the brief, grudging acknowledgement that maybe, just maybe, his youngest son had built something real. "Have a seat," I said, gesturing to the leather chair across from my desk. He hesitated for a moment before crossing the room, lowering himself into the chair with a quiet groan. I watched as he settled in, his eyes flicking around the room, taking in the quiet hum of the air conditioner, the faint smell of fresh coffee, the meticulously organized stacks of paperwork on my desk. He cleared his throat, leaning forward, his elbows resting on his knees. "Son, I'm not going to sugarcoat this. We're in trouble." I leaned back, folding my hands in my lap. I gathered that much. "What kind of trouble are we talking about?" He hesitated, his gaze dropping to the floor. "Financial. Your mother and I. We made some bad investments, trusted the wrong people. The retirement fund is gone. The house is underwater. Mark's company isn't doing as well as he's letting on either." I felt a flicker of surprise, but quickly masked it. I'd known things were bad, but I hadn't realized they were this desperate, and I prompted, my voice cold, detached. He looked up, his eyes glassy, a hint of the old pride still clinging to his expression. "We need your help. A loan just to get back on our feet. You've done well for yourself. You could afford it." I leaned forward, resting my forearms on the polished wood of my desk. "You're asking me for a loan?" He bristled, his jaw tightening. "We're family. I shouldn't have to ask." I let out a bitter laugh, the sound sharp and hollow in the quiet room. "That's funny? Because it seems like the only time you remember I exist is when you need something." He flinched, his fingers clenching into fists against his knees. "That's not fair." I leaned back, my eyes never leaving his. "Isn't it? You've spent years treating me like a disappointment, like a burden, like a footnote in Mark's success story. But now that you've managed to drive yourselves into financial ruin, I'm suddenly part of the family again." Silence. He looked away, his jaw working, the tendons in his neck standing out like cords. "I'll make this simple," I said, my voice dropping to a low, dangerous tone. "I'm not your safety net. I'm not your backup plan. I'm not here to bail you out because you made a series of terrible financial decisions." His head snapped up, his eyes narrowing in sudden wounded anger. "After everything we've done for you, this is how you repay us." I felt the old anger flare up, the bitter, simmering resentment that had built over years of neglect and dismissal. "What exactly have you done for me? Ignored my successes, dismissed my hard work, acted like I was a failure because I didn't follow the path you laid out for me." He opened his mouth to argue, but I cut him off, my voice sharp, unyielding. "I built this business from the ground up. I spent years driving trucks, sleeping in rest stops, eating gas station sandwiches, missing holidays and birthdays, while you sat in your comfortable suburban home looking down your nose at me. And now you want me to bail you out?" He leaned back, his face pale, his hands trembling slightly. I could see the anger, the humiliation, the desperation warring in his eyes. I let the silence stretch, watching him squirm, letting the weight of his own failures settle around him like a lead blanket. Finally, I leaned forward, my voice dropping to a cold, final tone. "No, I'm not giving you a dime. You made your choices. Now live with them." He stared at me, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. His face twisted with a mix of shock and fury. I rose from my chair, stepping around my desk and opening the door. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a business to run." He stood slowly, his shoulders sagging, his eyes burning with a quiet, impotent rage. Without another word, he walked out of my office, his footsteps heavy, his pride shattered. As the door swung shut behind him, I leaned back against my desk, letting out a slow, steady breath. My heart still pounding, my hands trembling with the adrenaline rush of the confrontation. I'd drawn my line in the sand, set my boundaries, made my stand. And for the first time in years, I felt free. Story 2. My fiancé sent me a chilly SMS. "The wedding is off. As you like," I calmly answered. "Expect a call from my lawyer." After that, I discreetly removed my name from our mortgage application for the opulent condo she had demanded. Her lawyer called furiously within 48 hours. My customer stumbled because he was unaware of the financial ramifications. She demanded that I clean up this mess right away when she arrived at my home that evening, carrying fancy luggage. Hello everyone, I need your assistance before we begin today's video. One of the greatest ways you can help us out is to subscribe, since we've observed the channel is losing some of its popularity. It's simple, free, and helps us continue to provide you with amazing content. Your assistance is much appreciated. Together, let's continue to build this channel. Many thanks. Let's begin the video now. Hello, longtime lurker on Reddit. Since some participants may be familiar with my primary account, the first-time poster was thrown away for obvious reasons. Hold on tight because this is going to be a lengthy one. After seeing a similar post on the first page yesterday, I decided it could be cathartic to get this off my chest after months of considering whether or not to share my tale. Additionally, it could assist someone else in identifying the warning signs that I overlooked. A fair caution. I suppose I should give some history first because this is going to be a crazy roller coaster from beginning to end. As a 31-year-old man, I am employed at an aerospace business in Seattle as a mechanical engineer. A quite ordinary man, a little too heavy. I'm working on it. I'm coming to grips with my receding hairline, and undoubtedly more at ease discussing tensile strength than fads. I came from a middle-class family in Michigan, worked part-time jobs, and received scholarships to attend college, and immediately after graduation, I got a good job. Then I got to know Jessica. In terms of appearance, she was totally out of my league. A 28-year-old marketing executive at a prominent company. 3 years ago, we met at my buddy Kyle's birthday celebration. I still don't know why she gave me her number that evening, but she was his coworker's plus one. She is one of those women who appear to have been taken straight out of a magazine. We clicked, even though I don't often go for men like myself. Or I believed that we did. The first year was fantastic. She appeared really interested in my job and was pleasant and adventurous. Despite the fact that discussing aeronautical engineering during dinner isn't really interesting, she would write me encouraging messages during important presentations, inquire about my projects, and occasionally even wear this weird NASA t-shirt I got her to bed. In hindsight, there were warning signs from the start. However, love is blind, isn't it? She would say these few things about my potential, how networking would help me become a senior engineer, or how dressing better for customer meetings would draw management's attention. I believed her to be supportive at the time. After a year, I can see that she was attempting to shape me into someone I wasn't. Things began to shift. Her recommendations turned into critiques. An accomplished professional suddenly found my apartment too tiny. It was awkward to have my fully working Honda next to her BMW. My companion's lack of ambition was preventing me from moving forward, because he was too blue-collar for her group. My brother Alex, who has been my best friend since I was a youngster and works in construction, was progressively cut out of our social gatherings. However, I began to change because I was in love. I purchased better clothing. I smiled at her boss's ridiculous jokes while attending her ostentatious business parties. I spent less time with my brother. She insisted that we should remain in Seattle close to her family and social network, so I even declined a promotion offer in Chicago. After 2 years, she sobbed and accepted my proposal, then got to work organizing a wedding that would have cost more than my yearly salary. Investing in our social capital is key. Whenever I brought up the budget, she would say that these relationships would benefit us both. I therefore started setting aside portions of my bonuses and overtime pay in a special savings account. In the end, I had $22,500 saved just for wedding deposits. Jessica claimed to be saving for our future in different ways, but she never made a single contribution. Because, well, I was a fool, I didn't question it. She began putting a lot of pressure on us to purchase a home 6 months prior to the wedding. Not just any house. She resided with all of her business associates in a $785,000 home in Bellevue's most exclusive neighborhood. If we want to be taken seriously, Mike, we need to have a place in this neighborhood, she said. I totally ignored the fact that the mortgage payments would put a strain on my finances. However, I concurred once more. Love dumbs you down. My credit score was higher. Therefore, I was the lead borrower on the preliminary mortgage forms that we signed. She had previously made many Pinterest boards for every area and was organizing improvements. She had even promised her parents that when they came from Portland, they would have a special guest bedroom with a separate bathroom. Everything was in place. The wedding was 4 months away. The house closing was planned for a month after that. Despite my financial worries, I thought we would find a way to make it work. One evening, I sat down with a spreadsheet and tried to figure out how I was going to pay for the wedding and the house and still have money left over for needs. There was a problem with the math. Jessica insisted on keeping our funds apart until after the wedding. Even though our combined income should have been plenty, she would argue it's simply cleaner that way. However, all of the significant costs were somehow ending up on my side of the ledger. I made an effort to have a meaningful discussion about money that evening. I gave her my spreadsheet, told her about my worries, and said we might want to consider a less expensive area. She regarded me as though I had proposed that we live in a cardboard box. Do you want us to succeed or not, Mike? There is more to this area than just a home. It's about opportunities, relationships, and surrounding ourselves with individuals who will help us advance our professions. We can't afford it, though, I demanded. Not unless you intend to make a sizable mortgage contribution. She let out a loud sigh. As I previously mentioned, I am in charge of organizing the honeymoon and wedding vendors. In addition, I'll be eligible for a significant promotion that will quadruple my pay when we get married. Until then, all we have to do is project the proper picture. I had never heard of such promotion before, but it gave me hope. Perhaps she was correct. Perhaps this temporary financial hardship might eventually pay off. I decided to proceed with the house designs, despite the knot in my gut. Since our furniture evidently wasn't suitable for the new location, we spent the next weekends traveling to open homes, consulting with interior designers, and attending dinner parties with her neighborhood acquaintances. I started to feel out of place. Jessica, though, appeared to love it all. As though I were a status symbol rather than a real person, she had presented me as my fiancé, the aerospace engineer. Then came the text that made all the difference. I can pinpoint the precise moment when my entire existence was turned upside down. To get through a major project deadline, I was waiting in line at QFC with a basket full of weird, crappy pizza rolls, upscale perfumed trash bags, and energy drinks. When my phone buzzed, Jessica's name appeared. At first, I didn't give it much thought. I assumed it had to do with dinner plans or the controversy surrounding the wedding venue that had been taking up much of our chats lately. Rather, I received 8 words that were like a kick to the stomach. The wedding is off. My lawyer will call you. That was it. No feeling, no justification. Not even punctuation correctly. With the exception of the final cold spell. as if I were only a commercial transaction that she deemed unworthy of her attention. Like a fool, I just stood there paralyzed. It was my time, but the clerk had to remind me again. I recall paying for my belongings automatically. Before I could even get myself to enter my apartment, I sat in the parking lot for almost 15 minutes after driving home in total stillness. The most peculiar aspect, I was not shouting or sobbing, I simply kept quiet. "As you wish" was the only thing I sent back. She most likely didn't even understand the Princess Bride illusion. But I understood the true meaning of the passage. It went beyond simply calling off our wedding. She said, "Don't get in touch with me. Everything will be handled by my lawyer." She believed she had all the cards as I was being thrown out like yesterday's trash, but she overlooked something really crucial. Something occurred to me as I sat on my couch and gazed at her text message. We recently began creating the joint accounts, the mortgage, and the wedding money. Everything was still being worked on. Nothing was decided. So before I even removed my coat, I made up my mind. I pulled out my laptop, went to the Chase Bank mortgage interface, and logged in. It took just 3 clicks to complete my application. Her vision of the ideal Bellevue mansion vanished in an instant. Most likely, people believe that to be trivial. Perhaps it was. But after all the sacrifices I had made, I had to gradually erase myself for 3 years in order to become what she desired. This was more than petty behavior. I wanted to preserve some of my dignity in this situation. I still wasn't ready for what came next, though. The hours that followed were bizarre. I kept anticipating Jessica to bombard my phone with messages and calls for an explanation. However, nothing was present. In some ways, the quiet was worse than any encounter involving anger. What I was beginning to think was verified. I was disposable now that I had fulfilled my purpose. That night, I hardly slept at all. My thoughts continued to race, reliving every instance of our connection in an effort to find any hints I could have overlooked. Did I say something or did I do something? Was this something she had planned all along? With no answers in sight, the questions continued to accumulate. Despite feeling like a zombie, I made myself go to work the following morning. After glancing at me, my team lead inquired as to my health. After hesitating, I just said, "The wedding was called off by Jessica." I nearly cried when I saw the compassion in his eyes. Silently, he whispered, "Take the week off. When you return, this project will still be under progress." With an appreciative nod, I left for home, grabbing some comfort food at the grocery store. I saw it at that moment, a bridal magazine with a model wearing the dress Jessica had selected on the cover. I felt a strange disconnection as I stood in the checkout line and stared at it. I was supposed to marry this woman today, and that was only yesterday. She was an unknown individual who had ruined my life through text messages. I returned to my apartment and began to collect Jessica's belongings. Her toiletries, a few books, and the clothes she kept at my house. Considering that we had been dating for 3 years, it wasn't much. At that moment, I realized how little she had truly put into our relationship. She wasn't even very present in my house. She insisted on us spending time at her place because it was more pleasant. I had overlooked another warning sign. I carefully labeled Jessica's belongings, packed everything in boxes, and placed it by the door. After that, I took action that I had been putting off for months. I gave my brother Alex a call. We had a brief but therapeutic conversation. "I told you so" was not what he said, despite the fact that he had never trusted Jessica completely. "I'm coming over and I'm bringing pizza," he said. Catching up with my brother that evening, I experienced a peculiar mixture of relief and destruction. The destruction was clear. Just now, my future had fallen apart. It felt like I had been holding my breath for 3 years, though, since it took longer to comprehend the relief I was bending to meet Jessica's specifications. Finally, I was able to let out a breath less than 48 hours following the SMS message. My phone calls when I'm eating the same pizza rolls I purchased at the shop while lounging on my couch. Unknown figure. Since I'm not under that much stress at the moment, I let it go to voicemail. This notice shows up a minute later. "Hello, this is Rebecca Goldstein, attorney for Miss Jessica Chambers. We urgently request a callback regarding your mortgage withdrawal, as this action may constitute breach of contract or financial interference. Please contact us immediately." I almost laughed at the urgently request part. Suddenly, her lawyer wasn't so cold and clinical anymore. Funny how it works when you strike them in the wallet. I didn't call back. Instead, I simply waited. And sure enough, more calls followed. emails to everybody with growing urgency. They weren't expecting me to fight back. Jessica, in her normal manner, must have expected I'd be absolutely destroyed, maybe even begging her to reconsider. But I wasn't. I had just finished. Kyle, a buddy of ours, called me the next day. He sounded really uncomfortable. "Hey dude, did you actually leave the house deal?" "Yes, because Jessica is panicking out." I said, "Okay." She reportedly instructed all of her coworkers to start shopping for homes in the same neighborhood and had already bought around $18,000 worth of bespoke furnishings. I nearly replied, "Not my fucking problem," but I refrained. Although, to be honest, I may have came off as nasty. I didn't want to, she continued. "You're being vindictive that you're doing this to punish her." When Kyle paused, "She even had the audacity to inform everyone in the office yesterday that you were mistreating her financially by canceling the mortgage." I laughed out at it. Abusing her money. The woman who didn't spend a dime on our future wedding or house. After 3 years together, the woman just attempted to text me to break up with me, Kyle. She is free to say anything she likes. If someone texts me to break up with me, I won't buy a property with them. After a lengthy silence, Kyle said something that truly struck a chord with me. "Yes, that's reasonable. Just so you know, though, she has been giving various explanations for why you two split up. She is claiming that it was reciprocal to certain persons. She is implying to others that there were issues she was unable to discuss." Man, it's strange. I sat there contemplating the issues she was implying after we hung up. What did she mean to say? That I was violent, unfaithful. I could tell she was in damage control mode because she was telling various tales to different individuals. However, why regulate damage? If she made this choice, the numbers didn't add up. The days that followed were a peculiar combination of sudden epiphanies and emotional apathy. I was recalling talks with Jessica that, although innocent at the time, now had a sinister gleam to them. For example, when she would reacted with barely disguised disappointment, or when she casually said that her ex had been generous with her money and that she had anticipated more from him whenever I brought up retirement savings rather than spending money on luxuries. I began searching through previous images of us together from different occasions on my phone. In practically every shot, it was like staring at strangers. Jessica had the ideal position and was conscious of the camera, but I appeared a little awkward, as if I were making too much of an effort to blend in with her environment. What had caused me to lose touch with myself? The harsh realities of finances also hammered home. I totaled the money I had spent on our relationship over the previous 3 years. By looking at my bank accounts, the sum was astounding. She had pushed that we take excursions that cost us close to $65,000. Restaurants where the bill always ended up in front of me. For no apparent reason, presents for her professional achievements, and of course the wedding cash. Her contributions, meanwhile, had been small. Occasionally preparing a wonderful meal or purchasing birthday gifts for me that were far from matching the money I had spent. But it wasn't just about the cash. The unbalanced take and take with minimal give was the main focus. I hadn't realized how one-sided our relationship had become, because I had been so consumed by what I believed to be love a week following the text of the breakup. At last, I made myself cancel the wedding suppliers. Explaining that the wedding was off without going into specifics made each call agonizing in its own way, although I lost some deposits. Most were understanding. Our cake would be made by one vendor, a tiny family-run bakery. It stung especially. The owner sounded really unhappy, even though she had been really enthused about our design. "When you two entered for the tasting, it seemed like you were in love," softly she said. All I could say was that I believed we were. For the first time since the text, I poured myself a cup of coffee, canceled the final vendor, and sat on my balcony to watch the rain. In Seattle, tears were streaming down my face. For the future, not for Jessica. I lost the person I had tortured myself into being, and I believed I had the life I had planned. But something else was bubbling behind the sadness. A silent resolve, an understanding that I had been given the opportunity to take back my identity before I made what would have been the most significant error of my life. Perhaps this was a gift as difficult as it was. At that moment, a second alert appeared on my phone, an email from the mortgage broker verifying that my application had been withdrawn. It said in the subject line, "The application has ended. Options for the future are accessible." It was strangely prescient, what Jessica was unaware of. No one was aware that in the weeks before to her communication, I had begun to notice strange things. There were traces of her job, including late-night emails, in which she would conceal her screen for mysterious client meals that appeared to be unusually late. When I entered the room, she would instantly lock her phone. I hadn't seen everything. I simply didn't want to accept the possible meaning. But now that everything was falling apart, I felt as though I could see properly for the first time. I chose to remain silent rather than respond to her lawyer or attempt to save anything. Give them a panic, let them speculate as to my next course of action. The truth began to seep to the surface during that period of stillness, around 8 p.m. 3 days after the text, someone knocked on my apartment door. I had no expectations. It was Mr. Chambers, her father. He delivered this heartfelt speech about how happy he was to have me join their family over dinner a month prior, which was the last time I saw him. He just seems worn out and ashamed now. He blurted out what was happening in the home without even saying hello, saying, "I'm not buying a house with someone who texts me to say we're done and sends her lawyer to speak to me." I crossed my arms. "Are you present on her behalf?" He glanced down. "No, she won't tell us the truth. Which is why I'm here. She says the wedding is off 1 minute. She then yells about furnishings, credit pulls, and invoices, threatening to be disgraced in front of her Apex marketing colleagues." I briefly thought about telling him everything, all of my concerns and the warning signs I had been ignoring. However, I didn't. I just stated that she terminated it. I appreciated that for the first time in her life she was able to deal with the fallout from her ex. After giving a slow nod, he said something along the lines of, "I told her not to do this," and turned to go. As I watched him go, an odd serenity descended upon me. The real bombshell, however, was on the horizon. I received a call from my brother Alex the next morning. Growing up, we were always close, but over the previous year, Jessica's remarks about Dad being too blue-collar and out of step with our new social group have effectively strained our relationship. It had been over a month since we last spoke. He seemed uncertain as he said, "Hey bro, Kyle told me what had transpired with Jessica. Listen, I should have probably told you this months ago, but I have something to tell you now." My heart began to race. "What is it?" A lengthy pause ensued. "Do you recall that remodeling project I was working on at that upscale apartment building downtown? The location of Cascade Heights?" Yes, I did see Jessica there with a man. They appeared quite comfortable as they entered his flat together. I was at a loss for what to think. The manner they were touching each other may have been a work-related incident, but I wasn't sure if I should inform you, so I snapped a quick photo. I didn't want to ruin everything if I was mistaken. While we were still on the phone, he texted me the photo. It was unmistakably Jessica in a dress I had never seen, with a tall, well-groomed man wearing a fancy suit. There was something more than friendly about the way his hand was on the small of her back. It was from 2 months ago, according to the timestamp. Ryan is the man's name. Said Alex, I spoke with a few of the building's maintenance staff. He is a very successful investment banker, drives an Aston Martin real jerk, who boasts about his collection of watches. Ryan. Immediately the name clicked. She had brought him up a few times, but only as a client of her marketing company, claimed that he was significant yet challenging. He must have been significant. Okay. We hung up, and I immediately started looking into it. When I accessed her Instagram, the majority of her postings were abruptly hidden. First red flag. However, her tagged photographs were still visible to me. 3 weeks ago on the same weekend, there was one from a charity gala. She says she was visiting a spa for a girl's getaway. Ryan, this guy, was in the picture instead of her. Additionally, her arm and a portion of her garment were visible in the corner. It was the same outfit in Alex's photo. I continued to dig, looked in the recently erased folder for our shared cloud photo account that we had created for wedding preparation. I discovered a number of her selfies that I had never seen before, obviously taken at someone else's place. Elegant space with windows from floor to ceiling and a view of the Space Needle. A hotshot banker would have a home like that. Things were beginning to come together. The frequent comparisons to her friends, husbands who were truly making a name for themselves. The abrupt comments about my pay and the mounting push to relocate to a pricey area that was beyond our means. The remarks that I ought to network more and look better. She wasn't only being unfaithful, she was improving. Additionally, I was the unnecessary stepping stone. I needed a day to comprehend everything, to let the hurt and rage run their course. Then I took a step that I hadn't taken in almost a year. I contacted Trevor, a friend from college, who had been offering me a position at his engineering business in Denver, but I had declined since Jessica demanded that we establish a presence in Seattle. "Hello, unknown person." When he picked up, he said, "I owe the pleasure to what? How is that offer of a job going?" I inquired. A pause occurred. Then he chuckled. "At last you quit your job as a princess. Still available, guy. $125,000 plus moving costs. When are you able to begin?" I grinned for the first time in days. "What do you think about next month?" In a rough sea, the chat with Trevor was like a life raft. He launched into excited explanations of the projects I'd be working on, the team I'd be joining, and the amazing hiking trails just an hour from Denver instead of pressing for information about the split. It was just what I need. An idea of a future unrelated to Jessica or the life I had been attempting to create with her. For the first time in days, I felt energetic. When we hung up, I took out my notepad and began to make lists. Things I had to do in order to get out of Seattle, things to pack, or people to get in touch with. It was satisfying to be taking action and to have a solid strategy that was wholly original with me. I gave myself permission to reflect deeply on the ramifications of what I had learned that evening. Jessica wasn't only unfaithful. While she was pressuring me to make a financial commitment that would have crippled me if she had gotten her way, she had been meticulously creating a backup plan which she believed to be a superior choice. What stung most was that it was calculated. I couldn't help but wonder whether she had been seeing this Ryan man for a long time before accepting my proposal. Until something better arrived, our engagement had been a farce and a handy arrangement. I felt sick to my stomach from the inquiries. I couldn't sleep that night. Rather, I ended up seeking for hints by going over our text history. There they were all over the place. Harmless-seeming communications. Her Instagram posts included references to late meetings at events I wasn't invited to, which happened to overlap with dates. Last-minute cancellations of our plans due to work-related crises and a growing number of grievances over my financial decisions, lifestyle choices, and even hobbies. I was tired by morning, yet I was still able to think well. In order to provide notice of my flat, I composed an official email to my landlord. I used the internet to apply for a driver's license in Colorado. Even though Jessica didn't like it, I emailed the few friends I still had, notifying them about my impending move. Every move I made toward regaining my freedom was one step closer to the disaster she had left me in. However, Jessica's presence continued to hover like a ghost, even as I was making progress. Her lawyer insisted that I had moral and legal responsibilities with relation to the property acquisition, in a second more demanding email than the first. Without answering her father's remarks, I sent it to a friend who is a lawyer. This kept repeating in my head. I told her not to do this. How had she broken things off, and what had he specifically cautioned her against? I had a sneaking suspicion that Jessica's romance with Ryan wasn't the only secret that would soon surface, and it was becoming evident that her carefully cultivated facade was starting to crumble under strain. My bank contacted the next morning just when I thought things couldn't get much more dramatic. Not a message that was generated automatically. A real expert in preventing fraud. At 11:37 p.m., it appears that someone attempted to take out the full $20,500 from our shared wedding savings account the night before. Because the transaction attempted to move all of the money to a secret checking account that was only in Jessica's name, it was marked as suspicious. I was still on the phone with the bank representative when my email pinged with a fresh message, subject line urgent about wedding finances, so I quickly slapped a freeze on the account and requested details of any previous access attempts. It came from Jessica's attorney, Rebecca Goldstein. "My client is worried about the money in the joint savings account for your now canceled wedding. Mr. Thompson, she paid many merchants directly and made multiple deposits into this account. She thinks she has a right to get a sizable amount back." Incredulous, I gazed at the email. This whole thing was a lie. Every bank statement and deposit record I had proved that all of the money originated in my account. Jessica had made no contribution at all. She had always kept her finances apart, arguing that it was more prudent for her to pay for some things alone. She was now attempting to pilfer my money and claim a portion of it as her own. Trevor had a brother-in-law who worked in family law, so I forwarded the email to him. He answered right away. "Keep everything safe. Every text. Every email. Hire a lawyer yesterday." So I did. I spoke with Sherry Levin, who is said to be the most tenacious family law lawyer in Seattle, that afternoon. Her $5,000 retainer wasn't cheap. But the instant I described my predicament and showed her the facts I'd acquired, She took the case. "Mr. Thompson," she added with a smile that reminded me of a shark. "Given the situation, you've been remarkably restrained, but it's time to defend yourself. It is obvious that Miss Chambers is trying to commit fraud." That same day, she sent Jessica's attorney a formal cease and desist letter that included screenshots of the attempted illegal withdrawal and all the bank documents demonstrating the money was mine alone. She also suggested that I stop communicating with Jessica altogether and let the legal process handle things. My phone was overflowing with notifications that evening. Jessica had made 8 consecutive attempts to call me. She began texting when I didn't respond. "It's unbelievable that you have a lawyer. We must have an adult conversation about this. You're acting illogically. Has the account been frozen? For the cancellation costs. I need that money." None of it got a response from me. Instead, I sent everything to Sherry and blocked Jessica's number. The next morning, Kyle called again. He sounded anxious. "Dude, Jessica came into the office today completely upset. She was telling everybody who would listen that you're attempting to bankrupt her, that you're withholding her money for the wedding vendors who are threatening to suit her." "That's strange," I said calmly, "since I have documents indicating I paid for everything and she contributed nothing." "Yeah, well, there's more," Kyle continued, his voice falling. "She's also telling others you were controlling, and that's why she had to stop things quickly, that you supervised her expenditures and separated her from friends." My blood ran cold. Although she was the one who had dominated every part of our relationship, chastised my friends, and alienated my family, she was attempting to portray me as the abuser. "You've known me for years, Kyle. Do you think so?" "Obviously not." He spoke hastily. "But I know you better than anyone at work. Additionally, Jessica is capable of being persuasive when she so chooses." I sent Sherry this new information after we hung up. She responded right away. "This modifies our strategy. We must address these unfounded allegations before they become more widespread and obtain witness accounts of her behavior from friends and relatives." A haze of legal preparations characterized the following 48 hours. Sherry asked me to compile friend testimonies on Jessica's domineering conduct. In a sworn declaration, my brother admitted to seeing her with Ryan. I created a comprehensive history of our relationship that included all of the warning signs I could recall in retrospect, as well as the critiques, isolation strategies, and financial manipulations. Jessica's attorney sent another email during this time. The tone was very different this time. "The escalation of what my client considered to be a private problem has upset her. If you agree to help with the house problem, she is prepared to give up any claim to the joint account translation." Jessica was attempting to use the money as leverage for the house after realizing she had been caught in a lie about it. The simplicity of Sherry's response was exquisite. Documentation of Miss Chambers' effort to scam him is in the possession of my client. Her unlawful attempt to obtain money that was clearly his alone, followed by her disparaging his reputation in front of common acquaintances. If required, we are ready to take this issue all the way to the end of the judicial system. Regarding the property which was never bought and any money that is exclusively my client's, there will be no discussion. Things really took off at that point. That night, I packed up even more of my possessions, going through years' worth of material to choose what was worth bringing to Denver. Examining each item and determining if it actually added value to my life, or if I had only purchased it to appease Jessica, was a strangely soothing exercise. The cost of the items she had demanded I bring to client meetings. The pompous art books that I had never read were being sold. My prized collection of science fiction books, which Jessica had consigned to a cupboard due to their immature nature, was in a donation pile, absolutely accompanying me to Denver. My phone was vibrating with texts from unidentified callers while I worked. I believe that Jessica's friends were attempting to coerce me into answering. I paid them all. No attention. Sherry had made it plain. Around midnight, no communication other than through authorized means. I was worn out, but pleased with my progress. Before going to bed, I took one more look at my email. The subject line of the mail was from an address I didn't recognize. "You ought to be aware of Jessica's reality." I moved my finger over the delete button. Curiosity prevailed, even if it may have been just another manipulation technique. A lady called Megan sent the email claiming to have been Jessica's former coworker at her prior employer. Megan claims that Jessica had a history of clinging to wealthy men, using them to boost her social status or profession, and then letting them go when a better opportunity presented itself. Megan said that she had done the same to her last partner, a doctor who had paid for her apartment improvements and a car. She sought an excuse to end the relationship when he proposed. She started dating her employer 2 weeks later. Uncertain of how to interpret this information, I gazed at the screen. Was it someone with a vendetta or was it real? Without remark, I sent it to Sherry and eventually went to bed. A startling occurrence occurred the next morning as my imagination raced with potential outcomes. Jessica's attorney, Rebecca Goldstein, left Sherry a message requesting that they talk about a possible solution. The tone was significantly different from her earlier correspondence. It was more accommodative and less demanding. Something had changed. I quickly gave Sherry a call to deliver the message. She said, "Interesting timing. I was going to give you a call. After researching Miss Chambers last night, it appears that your predicament is not unusual. If this goes to court, a trend here may be extremely important. Megan's email. That was part of what I requested, but there's more. To put it mildly, your ex-fiancé has a long history of financial problems. Miss Goldstein and I are supposed to speak over the phone this afternoon. How is the packing progressing in the interim?" Her gentle admonition to keep going with my plans regardless of how the legal drama unfolds made me grin. "Denver is feeling really good," Sherry stated confidently. "Mr. Thompson living well is the finest kind of retaliation. Keep it in mind." My doorbell rang as I hung up the phone, another unannounced guest. There was no indication that this roller coaster would slow down. Around 10 o'clock that evening, I got a Facebook message from an unfamiliar account. No profile photo, only a name. Mitchell. "Ryan, let's have a conversation. Whatever game she's playing, I don't want to play it." As I answered, my hands were trembling. "Discuss what?" Quickly, he responded about Jessica and the falsehoods she has been telling us both. The next morning, we decided to meet at a coffee shop downtown. I came early in part to explore the area and in part to see if this was a trap of any sort. But the man from the picture arrived just in time. Tall, well-groomed with a pricey watch gleaming on his wrist. Bro classic finance. When he saw me, he came up and held out his hand. "I'm Ryan Mike." After getting our coffees, we located a peaceful spot. We awkwardly assessed one another for a minute. Then he said something. "First, I must know something. You and Jessica broke up exactly when she texted me 4 days ago to let me know that the wedding was off." He seems truly taken aback because her family had already invested in the house. "She informed me that you two broke up months ago and that you were just completing the purchase out of remorse. That old knot in my gut started to grow." That is untrue. Up until the day she sent that text, we were engaged. June was the planned month for the wedding. Ryan looked truly upset as he combed through his hair. "Jesus, it's been over 3 months since we first met?" She informed me that her ex was needy and refused to let go. She was unable to post about us on social media at this time because of this 3 months. I repeated mentally calculating the whole cost of our house hunting time, included the cake tasting we had done together, as well as the final location choices. "There's more." Ryan said, his expression uneasy. "She informed me that you were controlling your problems, sometimes even physically frightening. She had to end things softly because of this. It seemed as if someone had hit me. That isn't accurate at all. She was never touched by me. I didn't even raise my voice. Anyone who knows me will tell you." Ryan gave a slow nod. "I think you're real. Lately, things haven't been adding up. She informed me last week that she required $15,000 in order to pursue an investment possibility. The moment I paused, I became quite angry. Then yesterday, she called and sobbed about how her vindictive ex was attempting to destroy her career and finances. He laughed without amusement. "That's probably you." After she attempted to drain our joint account and then made false claims that she was involved. My lawyer wrote a stop and desist. I clarified that we spent about 2 hours analyzing timing, stories, and falsehoods. She gave us all. The resulting image was worse than I had anticipated. Jessica wasn't only unfaithful. She had been leading a totally double life, taking advantage of us both to make money. She claimed that I was harsh in order to justify her occasional unavailability when we were together. When she was with him, she informed me she was at work functions. In addition to asking him to engage in her business ventures, she had been pressuring me to purchase a home that I couldn't afford. Ryan paused just before we left. "You should be aware of another issue." She began mentioning her pregnancy last month. My blood froze. Are you expecting? Yes. However, she changed her mind when I began to probe her about doctor's visits and schedules, claimed that it was too soon to be certain. It struck me as odd. I thanked him for being honest and for meeting me. We got up to go. He uttered something that would always stick in my memory while looking me in the eye. Man, we both escaped a gunshot. However, it was you who dared to call her bluff. Equipped with this fresh knowledge, I reconvened with Sherry. She suggested that I write down everything I discussed with Ryan, but especially the serious false abuse accusations. We've got enough to sue for defamation, she said. Let's first observe their reaction to our initial stance, though. There wasn't much waiting for me. I got another call from Kyle that night. He sounded terrified. The most bizarre thing just occurred at work, dude. While we were in a meeting, Jessica received a call and hurried out, appearing to have seen a ghost. She returned after 20 minutes, packed up her desk, and departed. According to her boss, she will be taking a personal leave of absence with immediate effect. What did you do? I informed him that I had met Ryan about contrasting her lies notes. Kyle fell silent in shock. Goddamn. So the guy actually contacted you? That is... Wow. There's more, I said and explained about the pregnancy claims. The abuse allegations. All of it. Damn, Kyle whispered. I knew she could be manipulative, but this is next level. The next morning, my phone rang with an unknown number. Against my better judgment, I answered, Mike, it's Rebecca Goldstein, Jessica's attorney. I need to speak with you directly. I immediately replied that all communication should go through my lawyer, but she cut me off. I'm no longer representing Miss Chambers. I resigned from her case this morning after discovering my client provided materially false information. I cannot and will not be party to fraud or defamation. I was speechless. Her own lawyer had dropped her. Later that day, I received an email from Jessica's work address, the subject line. Simply read, Please against Sherry's advice, I opened it. Mike, I know I've made terrible mistakes. I'm seeing a therapist now and taking medication for my issues. I never meant for things to go this far, Ryan told me you two met. I know how it looks, but it wasn't like that. I was confused and scared about our future. Please don't file any lawsuits. My parents are devastated. My job is on the line. I'll do anything to make this right. I didn't answer. Instead, I forwarded it to Sherry with the note. I think she's finally realizing actions have consequences. The final communication came a week later. Not from Jessica, but from her father. He asked if we could meet at a small park near my apartment. Against my better judgment, I agreed. Mr. Chambers looked like he'd aged a decade in 2 weeks. The confident businessman was gone, replaced by a worried father with dark circles under his eyes. Mike, he began, his voice rough. I owe you an apology. A big one. Jessica, she's not well. She's been diagnosed with some serious issues. That's not an excuse for what she did to you. But I want you to know that the person you thought you knew, in many ways, she wasn't real. He explained that Jessica had been struggling with mental health issues since college, but had always refused treatment. The perfect image she projected was a facade that required increasing effort to maintain. We've convinced her to enter a residential treatment program, he said. It's the only way forward. But before she left, she asked me to give you this. He handed me a sealed envelope. Inside was a cashier's check for $22,500, the exact amount of the wedding fund, along with a handwritten note that simply said, I'm sorry for the pain I caused. You deserved better. We parted with an awkward handshake that turned into a brief hug. As he walked away, he turned back once. By the way, congratulations on the job in Denver. Fresh start. Sounds like exactly what you need.